Hi there, and welcome back to Line Reads, the channel where we share powerful insights and personal growth lessons through great books. Have you ever read a book that's more than just a story? David Copperfield by Charles Dickens is that book. It's a powerful journey of overcoming adversity, navigating complex relationships, and discovering your true self. From the moment David is born into a world of turmoil, to his rise as a successful writer, Dickens crafts a narrative filled with unforgettable characters and timeless lessons. But what makes David Copperfield truly special? Stay with me as we dive into this classic and uncover why it's still a must-read today. If you enjoy what you hear and want to dive deeper, we've included a link to the book in the description below. Now, let's get started. David Copperfield 1850 is the story of David Copperfield's life, from his turbulent childhood and struggles during youth to his eventual success as a writer. The novel vividly depicts the challenges David faces, the complex relationships he forms, and the colorful characters he encounters throughout his life. At the same time, David Copperfield reflects the complex social issues of Victorian England. Charles Dickens (1812 to 1870) was a British novelist and social critic, renowned for his captivating storytelling and unforgettable characters. He garnered widespread acclaim for works like Oliver Twist, A Christmas Carol, and Great Expectations. Dickens used his literary talent to expose social injustices and advocate for social reform during the Victorian era. Charles Dickens, one of the most prolific and great writers of the 19th century, authored 16 novels, some of which exceeded 1,000 pages. He often pondered how to begin a story, and David Copperfield offers the clearest portrait of Dickens himself. The novel bears all the hallmarks of Dickens: a gripping plot with dramatic twists, a diverse and memorable cast of characters from various social strata, sharp and insightful social commentary, and rich, vivid prose. Moreover, David Copperfield is considered his most autobiographical work. Like David, the protagonist of the novel, Dickens also experienced a difficult childhood and worked hard from a young age. Both David and Dickens began their careers as law clerks, before moving into writing, where Dickens found significant fame and wealth. David Copperfield's journey mirrors the life of Dickens in many ways. David Copperfield offers an insightful glimpse not only into Dickens at the height of his career, but also into his true self, his experiences, and his soul. Before we delve into the story of David Copperfield, let's take a moment to get acquainted with the backdrop. This journey will take us across England throughout the 19th century, but the core of the story unfolds in Victorian London during the 1840s and 1850s. It was a period of rapid urbanization and industrialization, leading to an ever-deepening divide between the rich and the poor. London's streets are the most vivid testimony to this stark contrast. In the grand boulevards of the city centre, ornate carriages roll along cobbled streets, carrying elegantly dressed ladies and gentlemen, passing magnificent buildings and luxury shops, selling satin gloves, imported tea, watches, and sparkling jewelry. However, just a turn down a narrow alley, the scene changes completely. Dilapidated slums, crowded with dozens of families living in cramped, stifling spaces. The air is thick with the smell of burning coal and sewage. The steady rhythm of horse hooves on the grand streets gives way to the clanging and screeching of metal from factories and workhouses. Interwoven with this is the loud chatter from pubs, the cries of children, the shouts of street vendors, and the sharp scraping of knives on stone. Much like London itself, David Copperfield is a vivid portrait filled with characters from all walks of life, each struggling to find their fortune and assert their place in Victorian society. Starting in the rural Suffolk, we meet Clara, David's gentle mother, and Peggotty, the loyal family servant, along with Peggotty's family, fishermen who live by the Yarmouth beach. The journey will continue to take us through London, where we will meet the impoverished but ever-optimistic Mr. Micawber, the charming yet scheming Steerforth, and the deceitful Uriah Heep. We will also meet David's most loyal friends, the eccentric but warm-hearted Aunt Betsy Trotwood, and the steadfast Agnes Wickfield, who always stands by David's side. Of course, the most memorable character is David Copperfield himself. As David asks in the opening lines of the novel, "Will I be the hero of my own life, or will that role be played by someone else?" A journey full of turbulence awaits him. The remainder of Charles Dickens' monumental novel, stretching nearly 1,000 pages, is dedicated to answering the question raised in the opening of the story. David was born on a gloomy Friday night, right at midnight, an hour that, according to local superstition, foreshadowed a life full of misfortune. The dramatic arrival of the boy coincides with the equally dramatic entrance of his Aunt Betsy Trotwood. Betsy came with the intention of being a godmother to her niece's daughter, whom she believed Clara was about to give birth to. However, Betsy's disappointment was palpable when she discovered that Clara had given birth to a boy. Enraged, she left the house in a fit of anger. Having endured a long, miserable marriage to a useless husband, Betsy declared her hatred for all men, even newborn babies. This turbulent beginning in David's life quickly settled, making way for a peaceful and happy childhood with his gentle mother, Clara, and the loyal, kind servant Peggotty. David's father had died while Clara was pregnant with him, and he was an only child. Yet, David's childhood was never lonely. He was warmly welcomed by the lively Peggotty family, including Peggotty's brother, the fisherman Daniel, and her two cheerful children, Ham and Emily. However, the arrival of Mr. Murdstone, the man pursuing David's mother, cast a dark shadow over David's otherwise happy childhood. Murdstone and his unmarried sister, Jane Murdstone, were stern and hypocritical individuals who believed children should always obey adults. They could not tolerate David's playing among the fishing boats with the servants' children. Everything David did seemed to displease Murdstone, and whenever he was upset, he would punish David. After one such punishment, David instinctively bit Murdstone's hand. This enraged Murdstone so much that he arranged for David to be sent to Salem House, a strict boarding school. At Salem House, the students were subjected to harsh discipline, crammed into dilapidated dormitories, and endured a meager diet. These conditions could easily be summed up with a short phrase, Dickensian. When David arrived at Salem House, he was forced to wear a sign around his neck that read, "Beware, he bites." However, Salem House wasn't entirely a hellhole. David quickly made friends with Tommy Traddles and James Steerforth, a charming boy who easily became the most popular student at the school. Although Clara Copperfield was far too gentle and weak to resist Murdstone's cruelty toward her son, her boundless love was a steady source of comfort for David. Then, tragedy struck. Clara passed away after giving birth to a son with Murdstone. Coldly, Murdstone removed David from school and sent him, at just 10 years old, to work in a bottle factory in London, which he owned. Alongside other child laborers, David began his work labeling countless bottles. The glue soaked through his worn clothes, and his fingers became rough and cracked from constant work. Regardless of the weather outside, the factory was always damp and dim. The children worked under the flickering light of rancid oil lamps. During this time, David stayed at the home of the poor but cheerful Micawber family. Mr. Micawber remained ever optimistic, never losing faith that everything will come right in the end. Despite the kindness of the Micawber family, David felt that his circumstances were hopeless and began to long for the Aunt Betsy he had lost touch with long ago. David mortgaged his meager possessions to gather enough money to travel to Aunt Betsy's house. After a long and arduous journey, he finally arrived at her quaint home in Dover. The little house, nestled in a lush green garden, seemed like a dream to the exhausted boy. However, Aunt Betsy's welcome was not as warm as the idyllic surroundings. Still harboring resentment over David being a boy instead of a girl, she reluctantly accepted him as an uninvited guest. Aunt Betsy's coldness began to thaw when the Murdstone family appeared, demanding to take David back. In this moment, Aunt Betsy firmly stood her ground, declaring that she would take David as her pupil and refusing to return him to the Murdstone. After settling the matter, she sent David to attend Dr. Strong's academy in Canterbury, a school that, thankfully, was a complete contrast to the oppressive Salem House. In Canterbury, David was arranged to stay at the home of Mr. Wickfield, a local lawyer. His daughter Agnes was the same age as David, and the two quickly became close friends. The Wickfield family's life was peaceful and prosperous. But the arrival of Uriah Heep, a new clerk at the law office, slowly sowed seeds of misfortune. Beneath his obsequious, humble demeanor, Uriah Heep harbored dark ambitions. Exploiting Mr. Wickfield's fondness for drink, he subtly encouraged Mr. Wickfield to drink more, gradually manipulating and controlling him. Meanwhile, David returned to London to intern at a law office, where he reunited with his old school friends. Tommy Traddles, who was lodging with the Micawbers, was also pursuing a career as a law clerk like David. Steerforth, ever the charming and generous figure, remained unchanged. David was initially thrilled to reconnect with Steerforth. Thanks to Steerforth's inheritance, the two indulged in the luxurious pleasures of London. However, things began to shift after David visited Peggotty's family in Yarmouth. David grew uneasy with the special attention Steerforth paid to Emily, now an adult and engaged to Ham, her cousin. Agnes also warned David about the negative influence Steerforth had on him. Simultaneously, at the Wickfield household, Uriah Heep began to reveal his true nature. He manipulated Mr. Wickfield into believing he had committed financial transgressions while intoxicated, forcing Mr. Wickfield to make him a partner in the law firm. Not content with that, Uriah turned his sights on Agnes, intending to marry her despite her resistance. As for David, he fell in love with Dora Spenlow, the daughter of the lawyer who employed him. Dora was beautiful but somewhat naive, and David was completely smitten with her. He cherished the sweet, romantic, and naive moments spent with her, seeing it all as a dream. Filled with hope by Aunt Betsy's promise of an inheritance, David dreamt of one day marrying Dora, but just as the future seemed bright, misfortune struck. Aunt Betsy's fortune was lost due to business dealings with Mr. Wickfield and Uriah Heep. Mr. Bacchus passed away suddenly, leaving Peggotty a widow, and, most tragically, Emily ran away with Steerforth, causing immense sorrow for Peggotty, Don, and Ham. Amid economic difficulties, David tries to discuss their tight financial situation with Dora. However, Dora, accustomed to being pampered and somewhat childish, reacts vehemently to the idea of managing their household budget. Feeling disheartened, David seeks solace at the Wickfield household. However, things are not brighter there either. The business affairs of Mr. Wickfield are entirely in the hands of Uriah Heep. Mr. Wickfield is indebted to Heep, and despite Agnes's attempts to resist Heep's manipulation, she begins to feel helpless and is forced to accept his proposal. At the same time, Don Peggotty continues his relentless search for Emily and finally finds her in Italy. Litimer, Steerforth's servant, informs David that Steerforth has grown tired of Emily, leading both David and Dan to understand that Emily has been abandoned. However, when they try to pinpoint Emily's exact location, she disappears again. Peggotty is devastated by Emily's decision, but blames himself for not preventing Steerforth from courting her. He drowns his sorrow in his fishing work to forget his grief. Following Agnes's advice, David begins working as a clerk for Dr. Strong, the headmaster of his old school in Canterbury, while also pursuing a writing career. Dora fully supports him, and as David starts to see small successes in his career, he and Dora decide to marry. Their happiness is short-lived. However, as Dora suffers a miscarriage and her health deteriorates, after a brief illness, she passes away. Uriah Heep hires Micawber to work at Wickfield's law office, believing that Micawber's financial struggles will prevent him from exposing Heep's wrongdoings. But Heep is mistaken. With the help of Tommy Traddles, Micawber gathers evidence to reveal Heep's fraudulent behavior. When the truth comes to light, the fortunes of Mr. Wickfield and Aunt Betsy Trotwood are restored. Martha Endell, an old childhood friend of Emily's, reappears. As a young woman, Martha moved to London but quickly fell into a life of degradation, becoming a prostitute. Now reformed, Martha still has connections in London's underworld. She brings news to Don Peggotty that Emily had been robbed of her innocence by Steerforth. Emily is now living in poverty in London after being heartlessly abandoned by Steerforth. Don plans to emigrate to Australia and decides to take Emily with him, hoping she can leave behind her painful past and start anew. Meanwhile, Peggotty drowns while attempting to save passengers from a shipwreck. Tragically, one of the passengers he tried to rescue was Steerforth. Amid these ups and downs, David feels lost. Mourning Dora's death, he reflects on his own fate. Just as the village had foretold at his birth, his life seems to be a series of trials. He has experienced both extreme poverty and relative comfort, wonderful friendships and bitter betrayals, true love and great loss. Through all these years, Agnes has loved him, cared for him, and supported him. When David finally realizes that his childhood friend is his true soulmate, a truth that both the readers and Agnes had already recognized, he quickly marries her. In his vast body of novels, Charles Dickens often creates a multifaceted portrayal of Victorian English society, weaving complex, interconnected plots. David Copperfield is no exception, and the novel is particularly sharp in exposing the harsh conditions endured by the working class. Dickens does not shy away from depicting the exploitation and abuse that the most vulnerable members of society, children, women, and the poor regularly face at the hands of those in power. The depiction of David's time working in a bottle factory is particularly haunting and evocative. As a child, Dickens himself had to work in a bootblacking factory, labeling jars of shoe polish. This personal experience deepened his empathy for the suffering of the lower classes. After achieving success as a novelist, he became a vocal advocate for child labor reform and used the power of his pen to bring attention to the grim fate of the working class. In David Copperfield, Dickens openly challenges the prevailing belief of the time that the upper class possessed superior moral qualities compared to the poor. The character of Steerforth, wealthy and charming, is portrayed as corrupt, selfish, and destructive. In contrast, the Peggotty family, despite their numerous misfortunes, maintains kindness and steadfastness. Ham Peggotty even sacrifices his life to save Steerforth, a noble act that starkly contrasts with Steerforth's base nature. As a supporter of the working class, Dickens could be seen as ahead of his time. However, his portrayal of women in David Copperfield reflects a more traditional view of gender roles. The characters of Agnes and Emily clearly embodied the Victorian dichotomy between the angel and the fallen woman. Women were often pigeonholed into one of these two categories. The angel is pure, innocent, and the ideal wife and mother. The fallen woman, in contrast, is seen as corrupt and immoral, posing a threat to the men they seduce and to social order. Although Dickens shows some sympathy for Emily, he still asserts that her actions were reckless and transgressive. Her downfall, though tragic, is presented as an inevitable consequence of her behavior. In stark contrast to Emily, Agnes represents the ideal Victorian woman, virtuous and self-sacrificing. Clearly, Dickens's views on women were not fully progressive. However, one undeniable and groundbreaking aspect of David Copperfield and his entire literary career was the warmth, empathy, and attention to detail with which he crafted a diverse and vibrant cast of characters. The novel centers around the life of its protagonist, David Copperfield. From his birth, David's peaceful childhood is abruptly shattered with the arrival of his cruel stepfather. After enduring years at a harsh school and experiencing child labor, David eventually finds stability in London as a legal clerk. However, it is only when he follows his dream of becoming a writer and realizes his love for his childhood friend Agnes that his story reaches a truly fulfilling conclusion. David Copperfield is an evocative and deeply moving portrayal of the life of its titular character. Reflecting Dickens' own tumultuous childhood, the story traces David's journey from a challenging childhood marked by abuse and loss, through his struggles and eventual rise to success as a writer. Dickens weaves a rich tapestry of characters, each representing different facets of Victorian society, and the novel reflects the complexities of social class, morality, and personal growth. David's life is shaped by numerous hardships, such as the cruel treatment by his stepfather, Mr. Murdstone, and the tough conditions he endures working at a factory as a child. Yet, through these trials, David encounters characters like the optimistic Mr. Micawber and the stern but caring Aunt Betsy Trotwood, who significantly impact his development. As the story progresses, David experiences love, loss, betrayal, and friendship, all of which contribute to his eventual growth into a wise and compassionate adult. One of the most compelling aspects of the book is Dickens' exploration of the complexities of human nature. Characters like the charming yet deceitful Steerforth and the scheming Uriah Heep embody the darker sides of ambition and manipulation, while characters such as Agnes Wickfield and Peggotty embody the virtues of loyalty, kindness, and resilience. Dickens also cleverly critiques Victorian society, using David's journey to highlight issues such as the exploitation of children, the hypocrisy of the upper classes, and the importance of personal integrity in the face of adversity. Through the lens of David's experiences, readers are invited to reflect on the societal structures of the time and their own moral compass. In conclusion, David Copperfield is both an insightful social commentary and a heartfelt personal narrative. Dickens' skillful storytelling and his ability to create memorable, multidimensional characters make this novel a timeless classic. For readers interested in stories of resilience, growth, and moral complexity, David Copperfield remains an essential read. Thank you for joining us in exploring the essence of David Copperfield. We hope this book brings great value to you. If possible, Please take a moment to leave us a review. Your feedback helps us continue to improve. We look forward to bringing you more interesting content in the future.